School, another community listening session for Burke County Public Schools. We've taken some feedback from our community members, and tonight's topic is on school and budget finance and the impacts of legislation regarding that. So I'd like to thank everyone that came out tonight, and we will be posting this on our website as a recording. Um, I've got We've got two board members up here. I've got Board Chair Miss Wendy Craven and Miss Jane Sahovich as our panel, and Mr. Keith Lawson, our Finance Director. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lawson. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swan. Thank you, folks, for attending tonight to hear all about the exciting subject of school finance. Uh, I'll just jump right into the presentation. I'll give you a brief overview of how public schools in North Carolina are funded, and then two significant bills that are under consideration now in Raleigh that have an impact on funding for the school system. First, in North Carolina, the General Assembly is constitutionally required to maintain a general and uniform system of free public education. And where you see these bolded, underlined sections in the slides, there's links to documents. If anyone is so interested to delve into things a little deeper, but I'll be brief in my presentation of those and not get into the specifics. I will say that the state of North Carolina has operated under three state constitutions in our history. Our first constitution was adopted in 1776. No provisions whatsoever at that time for public education. Again, in 1868, a new state constitution was adopted. It did provide for a public education, not necessarily a free and adequate public education, but it did provide for education. Also, in addition to that, it required at least 6 months in a school year. Then we come along to 1971. State government had grown to 200 departments in North Carolina. Much of the state constitution from 1868 was outdated and antiquated for modern times and disagreed with the federal constitution in many respects. And at that point, Article 9 was introduced and became a part of our state constitution that we still operate under. And Article 9 says that the state shall provide for a free and adequate public education for all children in the state of North Carolina. It also changed the requirement for a school year being at least 9 months, as well as mandatory attendance. The state funds are our highest or most significant portion of funding. For Burke County Public Schools, it's about 65%. Our annual budget's about $142 million. Of that, about $92 million is state funds. A majority of that, or the bulk of that, is used to pay teachers. So of $92 million in state funding in Burke County Public Schools, almost 95% of that pays salaries and employer benefits costs. Also, in addition to the salaries for teachers and staff, it funds things like textbooks, school technology, and transportation. Our second largest source with the advent of COVID and receiving of ESSER, elementary and secondary schools emergency relief funding, federal funds became our second largest source. Prior to COVID, it was our third behind our local or our county commissioners. The two primary sources of federal funding is Title I. Title I is for disadvantaged students or poverty counties. And then we also receive Title VI, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Of those two pots of money and offshoots of those two primary programs, that's about 19% of our total annual budget. Again, IDEA funds are used to provide special education services to students with disabilities. In North Carolina, uh, local or county governments are responsible for building and maintaining and equipping school facilities. State statutes require that counties set aside tax dollars, uh, and they are also able to issue bonds for school construction projects. The county commission, the county government, our county taxpayers account for about 12% of our total annual operating budget. As I said earlier, our annual budget's approximately $142 million, and throughout the 95% number of state funds is payroll and benefits related. Of all of our sources cumulatively, about 81% is salary and benefits related. We generate about 24,000 payroll checks and about 12,000 accounts payable checks per year, manage over 140 individual programs, and over 67,000 active account codes. Now to the legislative impact. Two very significant bills. One, April the 10th, was referred to the Rules and Calendar Committee, and that would be this, Bill 760 out of the Senate. It would radically overhaul North Carolina's school funding from a resource allocation model to a weighted student model. And what that means essentially is a resource allocation takes into account the local resources of a county, the wealth of a county, in determining and weighting the allocations of state funds to individual school systems. The weighted student model would completely nullify and eliminate that methodology and would set a benchmark per student for every student in the system, and then a weighted, and we don't know how it was arrived at, a weighted ratio for LEP students, for instance, language English learners, or for AIG students, our advanced and gifted, or for our exceptional children. The sponsors are Lee from New Hanover County, Gailey from Randolph-Alamance, and Barnes from Franklin-Nash-Vance. What this bill does, again, is reallocates the financial resources of the state to school systems. It doesn't at all or in any way address that North Carolina's per pupil funding ranks 48th in the country. We're 43% below the national average of per pupil funding. Our school funding effort, or the amount that we spend as a share of our GSP, our gross state product, which is akin to the gross domestic product federally, and that is the value added from all production and products produced in the state of North Carolina. When you take it as a measure against our gross state product, we rank dead last in the nation in public school funding. So Senate Bill 670, rather than address that issue, reallocates financial sources across districts. And what happens is that by eliminating the wealth factor in funding counties and school districts, the larger urban counties benefit, and the low wealth and small counties lose funding under this model. It also eliminates the earmarking of funds. For example, based on current allotment policies and calculations, the Exceptional Children's Program, they receive funding, and it is to be utilized for and spent on exceptional children. Under this new model, the money wouldn't be earmarked, and money allocated to be used, or that would have been used traditionally for exceptional children, could be used in any way. This formula was we're not sure how the formula was developed, how the weights were developed, because most of this was determined behind closed doors without any input from educators. Burke County Public Schools, based on the new formulas this year, based on funds received, we would have received a 6.13% reduction, or $5.7 million less in funding than we received. To just be able to put that into perspective, and again, going back to, we're 95% in state funds, salaries and benefits, 95% salaries and benefits, people. It would take the equivalent of 78 teaching positions in order to make up for that deficit. On the House side, that was a Senate bill. On the House side, I know many of you have heard about the charter school omnibus bill, House Bill 219. Primary sponsors, Torbett of Gaston County, Bradford of Mecklenburg, Willis of Union, and Sane of Lincoln County. Currently, there's a lot of misperceptions out there about charter schools, the funds they receive or don't receive. Charter schools receive a per pupil portion of state funds, of federal funds, and of local funds, just as we do. They don't receive less. In particular, local, that's the one they like to focus on, that somehow, I don't know how it's portrayed, but the way the local funding works for charter schools, for instance, let's set state and federal aside. They get their per pupil portion right off the top. Their allotments just as we do from state and federal. Local, we, the school system, develop a local budget, go to the county commission, request funding. The county commissioners fund that request or not. And then the charter schools simply send us a monthly invoice of the number of children attending their school, and we give them their per pupil allotment. That's the way the local funding works. We have what's called a Fund 8, a special revenue fund. They're referring to that and calling that local funds. They're calling that the funds follow the student, the funds follow the child. That is not true. For instance, we have a driver's education fee that when students, high school students, take driver's ed, in order to get their certificate issued, they pay that driver's ed fee. That fee helps support the replacement and maintenance of the vehicle fleet, as well as maintaining the driver's education range at Freedom High School. We couldn't maintain our fleet or keep that facility up without that driver education fee. Charter schools would get a per pupil portion of that. Charter schools are K-8. They don't even have high school kids. Those kids they're receiving that driver's ed per pupil portion of that you all have paid for your child to take driver's ed goes to the charter school, yet that child that is at that charter school in K through 8 will be taking driver's ed through us in high school. Technology device fees, all of our students, we're a one-to-one district. Every student has a tablet, has an electronic device. You all pay a $25 fee to help support that program. You're paying that $25 for your child at Burke County Public Schools. A per pupil portion of what you paid to help support them being provided a device would go to the charter schools. Doesn't make any sense. Pre-K funding, per pupil portion would go to the charter schools. They don't have pre-K. They're K-8. JROTC, We have JROTC programs in our high schools. The federal government subsidizes the salaries of those officers that run those programs. They would receive a portion of that. They, again, don't have high school kids. If this bill were to pass, it would cost us annually approximately $360,000. Another example that I added late to this, but I just wanted to make a point of to try to drive home that this is not the money following the child. And might I mention, the charter schools, they can apply for grants. They collect tuitions and fees at their schools for various programs and initiatives and things that they do. They're not required to share that back with us. So even with the unfairness of this, take it another step, it's even more unfair because it doesn't work both ways. If we're going to share, they need to share back. We received $87,480 for the preservation of the Enola wetlands between Robert L. Patton High School and Mole Elementary. That's been a project years in the making. Had two very, very dedicated teachers at Patton High School that kicked that process off many years ago, have met with countless agencies, have put in for grants. We've been awarded those funds to preserve those wetlands on property between those two schools, yet we would need to send a per pupil portion of that money to the charter schools. So again, I just want to stress, when you hear it's money following the child, it's not money following the child. So with that, I would certainly be happy to take any comments, entertain any questions, clarify anything I may have said.
That was close. Anybody want to make any comments or anything, any new information that we've shared? A lot of our leadership folks know this and have heard it. We'd be happy to entertain. Once again, this will be posted to our website, and we appreciate the attendance tonight with our audience, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thank you.
I would like to say that on House Bill 219, Section 7 was taken out of that bill, that House bill. So we're not going to be dealing with this right now, but it could come back around to us again. So we need to be on our toes and make sure that we stay ahead of that and continue to push forward that this does not affect our students and it doesn't happen to us.
I'm very happy to hear that. I've looked, I've tried to find, I do know there were some amendments made late on 219 that was sent to Rules and Calendar, but I hadn't been able to find any details of that, so thank you.
Yeah, it just came out this week, Keith, that it was, Section 7 was taken out of that, and that's the funding. And I've been in contact with Hugh Blackwell on this too.
Thank you for that.
And thank you, Jane. That's hot off the press, but like Jane said, it could circle back around. So we have to be vigilant to watch that. And also for folks in the community, that's why we passed the resolution that we passed at our last board meeting in opposition to this charter school omnibus, and it was because of the money and how unfairly it would be taken from our school system and other school systems across the state of North Carolina.
And I think, as you said, Keith, it's really double dipping for them.
Right. I don't think any of us are opposed to alternatives. not afraid of competition, but we do like to have a level playing field. The charters insist and say they want a level playing field, and the lady, Kaylin Kuykendall, I can't pronounce her name, that's the director of the Charter School Coalition for the state, when she pretty much says those same words about asking for a level playing field, asking that the money follow the child. She knows, she's involved, and I don't think being sincere.
We'll continue
saying that.
coveting our money. Thank you, Wendy. That was a good point. We need to be vigilant on this.
Thank you.